2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Professor Jim Jose from the University of Newcastle, Professor of Politics. There is plenty to look at the moment. Last week, you spoke with Mark about the National Energy Guarantee and how Malcolm Turnbull had seemed to have a bit of a win in the party room.
Yes, well, last week I thought that if he was able to get a win, that this would give him some breathing room as leader, and he did in fact get the win, and it looked like he had moved the party into a more or less, united's the wrong word, but a more or less strong position in which the party was behind him. Unfortunately for him, there was a small rump of fairly conservative members of the party who, although had been outvoted, then began a campaign basically saying, we will cross the floor. We reserve the right to cross the floor. We've opposed to this in principle, so we're going to cross the floor if we don't get our way, sort of thing. That was basically putting a gun to Malcolm Turnbull's head and inviting him to pull the trigger. And in fact, he was in a serious situation. He faced the prospect of losing control of the lower house. That is to say, having the numbers. A vote of no confidence in him may have led to the party, to the government, having to stand down. So he wasn't prepared to risk that. So he renegotiated the National Energy Guarantee to what he thought was the satisfaction of the dissenters. They got everything that they wanted, and as soon as they got it, they then turned around and criticised him for changing his mind and saying he's not a leader who can be trusted, and they then proceeded to undermine him again. It's a really curious situation that when you get what you want, you then turn around and pretend that that's not what you wanted. So it's almost like a group of very selfish, naughty little schoolboys who will never be satisfied with the outcome, and they will always find a way to cause a problem. Now, Malcolm Turnbull's facing that right at the moment inside the party room. As we speak. And it remains to be seen whether he is able to persuade and keep the rest of the party on side, because part of the problem is that, the dissenters within the party are gradually eroding the confidence of other members of the party to support Malcolm Turnbull as leader. And of course, they look towards the forthcoming election next year, less than 12 months away now, with the view that maybe I will lose my job if we don't turn the polls around and start convincing the public that we are entitled to retain government. So there's that dimension which is worrying. I think Malcolm Turnbull is very worried about the way in which some of the people whose seats may well be up for grabs should the polls continue to go against the party.
So are there many people who might see themselves as potential leaders in place if there should be so much dissent within the party that it comes to a leadership spill?
Well, there's probably a couple of people. Peter Dutton, Minister for Home Affairs, his name's been put forward. There's probably a couple of others sitting in the background. There may be a dummy candidate who pushes the spill and then leads to a vote being called and a leadership contest being enacted. But we also have to think about it's a gamble. There's no guarantee, and I think there's a less of a guarantee at the present time that if they do change leaders, that this will necessarily lead to success in the polls come the next election. Yes, a change of leadership might see a spike in improvement in the government's popularity in the very short term, which often happens with leadership changes. People give the new leader some benefit of the doubt. However, once that new leader is in place, it doesn't take very long before others within the party room start eroding that leadership authority. I think it's likely that when people weigh up and do a bit of really hard number crunching around the country, around the potential which seats will stand or fall, perhaps, there may well be less a mood for change and more one, well, if we stick with the current leader and get behind him and seem to be united and deliver on that, there's a chance that they can pull that around. Because the irony is that the opposition, particularly the Labor Party, hasn't had to do very much, and it's not actually presented much of an alternative to the government. They haven't they don't stand out and say this is what we stand for and this is where we're heading and this is what we'd like to do. They've kept a relatively low profile, occasionally being able to capitalise on the government's mistakes, but at the same time there's not a lot of, shall we say, big support for the Labor Party. It's still in the sense of, well, we're really sick of this current government and they don't seem to be going anywhere. So in a poll, that's to say in an opinion poll, when the alternative is who would you vote for given these circumstances and whatever they might be, people are more inclined to then say, well, yeah, I think it's time for a change and I'll put my hand up for the opposition this time around. However, when it comes to election day, that is not necessarily how people will vote on the day. So the opinion polls give us some guide as to which way people might be thinking, and the mood is not very favourable for the government at present. That's a sort of obvious statement, if you like. But when it comes to what people will actually do come polling day, when it comes to changing their vote, that still remains to be seen. I mean, there's talk, for example, that Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party is taking all the votes. That may be true to a limited extent in Queensland, but I don't think that we can see the One Nation vote translating across the country. The problem is that in Queensland, the Liberal National Party had the opportunity with the Longman by-election to put its stamp on the seat, and it didn't. And it was partly because of its own incompetence. They're now turning around and saying, well, this is Malcolm Turnbull's fault. Well, not really. It was a Queensland issue and they should have done a lot better. To blame the leader of at the national level for their own mistakes at the state level seems to be a bit disingenuous. However, this is the situation that we're in now, Jane, and Malcolm Turnbull's doing his best, one would think, in the party room to convince the rest of the party to stick with him. There's one other point that perhaps is worth noting. Losing Malcolm Turnbull as leader and replacing him with someone else opens up the prospect that some of the people who have been less helpful for the party over the past couple of years, people like Tony Abbott, for example, there's not much enthusiasm within the party room for someone like him to be brought back onto the front bench into the ministry. And he would be demanding that he gets an opportunity to come back into the limelight. If someone becomes leader in place of Malcolm Turnbull, they have the prospect of maybe having him close to them. And this may be a recipe for disaster for them as well. So it may be that the prospect of having Tony Abbott back into, and others like him, destabilising them back inside the ministry may be too much, even for some of the sceptics within the party. So there might be a slim hope for Malcolm Turnbull to be able to keep people on the straight and narrow behind him. But it will be an uphill battle, and even if he succeeds today, it doesn't put paid to the constant rumblings within the party room. And come the next couple of weeks back in Canberra, there may well be a renewed set of speculation.